Strategizing a tyrant versus weakness without wind goddess, not in love with His Majesty, only in love with His Majesty. Your Majesty. Say it again. Ning. In these days, as long as we seize the opportunity and have a way to achieve our aspirations, we can achieve them. However, we are being targeted by the most prestigious and powerful men in the world, she said. What does Your Majesty intend? He said, one day is the future, and a lifetime is the future. She smiled and said, Your Majesty, didn't you say that my mind is too wild? He said solemnly, it is precisely because your mind is too wild that we cannot let you harm others. I am satisfied with it. Who is going to make you suffer? I only love mountains and waters, but I don't love you. I don't have any points in my heart. Later Ning looked at the children playing in the imperial garden, sweating profusely. Silently gazing up at the sky. I can't write an introduction, babies read the article. I like collecting, thank you. Keywords of the novel. The Empress cries in the palace with no pop-ups. The Empress cries in the palace with no pop-ups. Download the complete TXT collection. The Empress cries in the palace with no pop-ups. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Miansheng, King of Qi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Miansheng, King of Qi. Miss Yan, Your Majesty announces your entry. Ning stood outside the imperial study for 2 hours before seeing a father-in-law come out from inside. He smiled and spoke politely, but there was no expression on his face. Ning said, Thank you very much, Grandpa. The father-in-law stopped talking and led her directly into the inner hall. The rich aroma of dragon saliva floats in the nose, not greasy, but rather exudes a chilling sensation. Passing through 2 vermilion gates, Ning saw a person sitting in front of the dragon table. Without daring to stare, as soon as she lowered her head, she heard the father-in-law who led her in say, Your Majesty, Miss Yan has arrived. Ning immediately knelt down, her forehead touching the ground, and respectfully said, Ning, daughter of the guilty minister, has met Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty. There is no sound above the head. After a moment, Ning felt a look of pressure coming over. She held her breath. Ning, the king shouted. Ning stood up and said, Ning, daughter of the guilty minister, has met Your Majesty. Do you know why I announced to you? No. Very good. The emperor moved, and Ning heard his footsteps. From far and near, arrived in front of her. She knelt there, unable to see his dignity, only seeing a pair of dark dragon boots in front of her. Did you write the 18 admonitions yourself? Yes, Your Majesty. Raise your head. Ning paused for a moment, but still lifted her head according to Yen. The man in front of him was very tall, dressed in a black dragon robe, with his hair pinned in a jade crown. His eyebrows were as long as a sword, his face was as cold as a knife, and his whole body was as majestic as a dragon going out to sea. His lips were lightly pursed, his eyes were lowered, and his hands were held back. At this moment, he was looking down at her with a condescending gaze. After 3 years of ascending the throne, his fame spread far and wide. 10 Wuhou were consecutively appointed, shocking the court and the public. Some criticize him as a foolish ruler, some criticize him as a tyrant, and some praise him as a wise ruler. From court to court, there are mixed reviews of him. When Ning was looking at Qi Hunyuan was also looking at her. At first glance, she felt thin and pale, weak and unaffected, no different from an ordinary woman. But her 18 admonitions prove that she is by no means an ordinary person. Qi Hunyuan glanced at Ning again and said, Get up, I have something to ask you. Qi Hunyuan turned around and sat back inside the dragon chair. Ning supported her arms on the ground and slowly stood up. My legs trembled a bit, and the original owner's body couldn't withstand the turmoil. Qi Hingyuan said, "You can write 18 admonitions, why is your father still defeated in battle? Didn't you explain your views to your father? Or did he listen but don't use them, resulting in defeat?" In fact, the downfall of Lanzhou Pass occurred 3 years ago. At that time, she was still the queen of Jiang Chengqi, who was not yet an emperor. He was not even the crown prince. It was that unprecedented battle that led him to ascend to the throne, and later to become emperor. And in that war, the state of Qi was defeated, and Qi Hingyuan's brother, the former Qi emperor, died in battle. In order to redeem the body of Emperor Qi and make peace with the defeated, the state of Qi ceded thousands of miles of territory. She was the behind-the-scenes military commander who commanded the unprecedented battle that resulted in the defeat of all 18 beacon towers and 9 cities in the state of Qi. At that time, she was from Jiang, the princess of Jiang Chengqi. She had not yet died, nor had she become Yanning. Of course, she could not tell Yanbin the way to win the battle. My favorite babies, please bookmark it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The first step of Empress Dowager. To be appointed as a talented person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The first step of Empress Dowager. To be appointed as a talented person, Her Majesty Qi's words are 2 traps. If she answers that she did not inform, then she would be even more guilty. However, if she answers that she did inform, then it is a disguised statement that her father did not adopt it, and then her father is even more guilty. After issuing 18 admonitions in a row and finally receiving the imperial edict issued by His Majesty Qi, Ning knew that it was just the beginning, and the road ahead would be even more difficult. At least His Majesty Qi would not easily pardon her. See, accountability begins. Ning immediately knelt down again and said with great fear, "Your Majesty, 3 years ago, my daughter was not in good health. Half a year before the war broke out, my father sent her away. I only found out later that the war broke out 6 months later, but at that time, I couldn't write a letter." "Why can't I write a letter?" Ning's eyes dimmed. She whispered, "At that time, my eyes couldn't see and my hands couldn't move. It was said to be a case of virtual paralysis. It was possible that I was scared by something and couldn't recover for a long time. Later, my tribe suffered, my parents were imprisoned, and my eldest brother died in battle at Lanzhou Pass. Upon hearing the bad news, I was suddenly awakened. The virtual paralysis was actually cured." Qi Hingyuan shouted softly, "Chen Dongyan. I am here." A person stood out from behind the dragon chair, and Ning was kneeling. He didn't see the person's appearance, but from the sound, he also knew that he was a person with strong military strength. Her Majesty Qi has just ascended the throne, and she is not very clear about the people around him. Qi Hingyuan said calmly, "Go check." Chen Dongyan responded with a yes and immediately left with great strides to investigate the authenticity of Yanning's words. Half an hour later, Chen Dongyan returned. For half an hour, Qi Hingyuan didn't say a word more. He sat in the dragon chair and slowly closed his eyes, while Ning knelt all the time, numb in his knees and aching in his calves. Chen Dongyan whispered a few words in Qi Hingyuan's ear, but Qi Hingyuan didn't say a word and said, "I understand." Qi Hingyuan opened his eyes and his profound gaze fell on Ning, saying, "I have read all 18 of your admonitions to the Marquis of Yan, and they were quite shocked. Not to mention them, it is also unbelievable that there is such a god-like figure in this world who uses his army. It seems that you have obtained the true biography of Marquis of Yan and are truly the daughter of Marquis of Yan. It is a pity that you have been exiled with such talent." He didn't ask Ning to stand up, only left one sentence. "Wang Dihao, announced the decree." Wang Gonggang immediately took out the already written imperial edict, unfolded it, and earnestly recited, Ning, the daughter of the sinner Yanbin, is talented and wise, comparable to a military strategist. With such talent, it should be used by the country. It is a pity that it has been destroyed. Although it is a punishment for one's sins, it can make up for one's sins. She is bestowed as a talented person and resides in the Dongli Pavilion. There are 5 levels of official positions in the imperial harem of Qi, with the highest being the Empress, followed by the noble consort, followed by the concubines, beauties, and talents. The residence of the talented person is a pavilion, with 2 courtyards, 3 palace maids, and 1 eunuch. Taking this step, no matter what the future holds, Ning must accept it and transform it into a favorable situation for herself, seeking a way out. Originally, Ning speculated that His Majesty Qi would keep her for such a useful reason. But how to stay is uncertain. It could be imprisoning her in the harem, or it could be imprisoning her in the palace. In short, keeping her here and waiting for her next resourceful move. It is not surprising that he is now appointed as a talented person. Ning raised her arm and accepted the order. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your kindness." Qi Hengyuan said, "Step back." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Palace Maids Causing Difficulties, Ning Strikes Back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Palace Maids Causing Difficulties, Ning Strikes Back. Ning withdrew with the imperial edict, the sun setting westward, but the heat was still lingering. She held the hand of the decree, sweating slightly. Wang Gonggang walked out and said, Kairen, Dongli Pavilion is in Fengzi Palace. You need to first go and greet Chen Guifei in Fengzi Palace, and ask her to arrange palace maids and eunuchs for you. Everything in Fengzi Palace belongs to Chen Guifei. Did Kairen understand? Of course I understand. I said so much just to tell her that she belongs to the management of Consort Chen. Ning said, "Thank you very much for reminding me, Duke Wang. I will pay attention to propriety, but I don't know how to get to Fengzi Palace. Can Duke Wang send someone to lead the way?" Of course. Wang Gonggang called for a eunuch to come over and gave a few orders. The eunuch immediately led Ning towards Fengzi Palace. After arriving at Fengzi Palace, the eunuch bid farewell and left. Ning stood alone in front of the gate of Fengzi Palace, glanced at the door, and then went up to knock on it. The palace maid opened the door and glanced at Ning with a very unpleasant attitude. "Who are you? Do you know where this is? You just knock on the door randomly." Although she is a small palace maid, as she works as a maid in Fengzi Palace, her status is also somewhat high and her demeanor is full of airs. They have a clear understanding of the masters who hold certain positions in the palace, and most of the people around them are familiar, both inside and outside. Ning's face was very unfamiliar, and she was dressed in shabby clothes. She was a poor ghost who ran out of nowhere. How could there be anyone in the palace now? The palace maid looked contemptuous. Ning said calmly, "My surname is Yan, and my single name is Ning. I am grateful for your Majesty's favor and have just been bestowed with the title of talented person. I am moving into the Phoenix Purple Palace. If you don't believe me, you can read the imperial decree." Ning handed the imperial edict to the palace maid. She smiled at the corners of her mouth, but her eyes were full of calculations. She concluded that the palace maid dared not accept the imperial edict, and if she did, yawning. "I haven't heard of it before. Your Majesty has bestowed upon you the title of a talented person. With just you, can you still catch your Majesty's eye?" The little palace maid was probably used to being reckless, but her mouth was full of disdain and she reached out to grab the imperial edict to see it. "Unfortunately, I can't recognize all the words, some can understand and some can't." There was a cold light in Ning's eyes, and she suddenly shouted, "Dare!" Her voice was too loud and suddenly sounded, startling the palace maids. The palace maid shook her hand and the imperial edict fell to the ground. Ning immediately said, "How dare you disrespect your Majesty? I don't have any servants." The little palace maid panicked and her face suddenly turned white. When she saw the decree that had fallen to the ground, she immediately picked it up. Ning remained calm and said, "Blaspheming the imperial decree is like blaspheming your majesty. You, the palace maid, are really too bold. You may not consider me, but how can you not even consider your majesty?" She snatched the imperial decree and said, "I will go to your majesty to judge." The little palace maid grabbed her in fright and knelt down with a thud. Tyrant, it's because I have poor eyesight and recklessness, but I just want to confirm Tyrant's identity. I really don't want to desecrate your majesty or neglect Tyrant. You are a large number of Tyrant, please spare me, and I will take you to see the master now. Ning hesitated, deliberately showing a hesitant look. The little palace maid kowtowed to her and said, "Tyrant, please be kind. Ning has just arrived, and she doesn't want to offend everyone. If it weren't for the poor attitude of this palace maid at the beginning, she wouldn't have deliberately harassed her. This whole thing can also be considered as a way to persuade her, and stopping at once is the best strategy." Ning said coldly, "Get up and lead the way ahead." End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Fengzi Palace, Empress Chen Guifei. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Fengzi Palace, Empress Chen Guifei. The little palace maid repeatedly thanked and immediately stood up, leading Ning inside. Ning saw the respectful expression of the young palace maid and thought that the palace was no different from the outside. If you were not kind, others would respect you. On the contrary, the more ruthless you are, the more respectful others will be. This is the survival law in the harem, where the weak are afraid of the hard and the weak are the stronger. She didn't want to compete for favor, but in order to revive the family, she was bound to have ups and downs in the harem. Led by a young palace maid, Ning quickly arrived at the main hall of the Phoenix Purple Palace. The little palace maid carried the imperial edict with both hands and entered. After a while, a palace maid in charge came out and glanced at Ning, saying, "Tyrant, the Empress Dowager of the imperial concubine has invited you in." Ning glanced at the palace maid in front of her, followed behind her, and walked in. On the main seat sat a woman dressed in luxurious attire, very graceful and beautiful, full of luxury. She propped up her arms and looked at her. Ningfu bowed and said, "Ning has seen the Empress Dowager." Chen Yurong lazily said, Ning, the daughter of Bin, was dismissed by His Majesty due to the failure of the Lanzhou Pass and the failure of Lanzhou. The entire clan was sent out. In theory, why did you suddenly enter the palace and be appointed as a talented person by Your Majesty while on your way to exile? Ning replied conservatively, "Thank you for Your Majesty's kindness." Chen Yurong sneered and said, "Your Majesty has indeed shown great love." He summoned a daughter of a sinner into the palace and suddenly bestowed upon her the title of a talented person, who has come to live in my palace. This is not showing great love to you, but rather to my own palace. She picked up the imperial edict and casually said, "Since you're here, please be obedient. Kai Huan, take Tyrant to Dongli Pavilion and select a few palace workers who are skilled in their work." "Yes, my lord." Kai Huan responded and led Ning down. Chen Yurong was playing with that edict. How talented and wise, comparable to a military strategist. To receive such praise from Your Majesty, this woman must have outstanding qualities. Jianjia, please go out of the palace and ask what has happened outside and in the court recently. Jianjia immediately left the palace. An hour later when he returned, Jianjia said something in Chen Yurong's ear. Chen Yurong said, "I see." After Ning moved into Dongli Pavilion, she went to bed that night. This body is too weak and needs to be nurtured, and she dare not fuss around. The next day, I went to pay my respects to Consort Chen first. Consort Chen did not make things difficult for her and waved her hand to leave. Every day after that, Ning went to pay her respects to Consort Chen at Yinshe, and then went back to rest and recuperate. His Majesty Qi has never approached her, nor has she been to Fengzi Palace. I stayed in Dongli Pavilion for a month without any warmth, and my body became stronger. His Majesty Qi sent someone to announce her. Ning tidied up and followed the eunuch out. Before leaving the palace, explained to consort Chen. Chen Yurong said, "We live in the same palace, and that's a matter of both prosperity and loss. You can serve your Majesty well, add bricks and tiles to the Phoenix Purple Palace, and also plan for your own prosperity." Ning said, "Thank you very much, Empress Dowager, for your advice." Chen Yurong said coldly, "Go ahead, don't show off here in this palace." Ning paused slightly, and soon Fu Shen left. Or the imperial study. But this time, she didn't wait outside for 2 hours, and when she went, she was summoned into the palace. Qi Hingyuan handed her a memorial and said, "Yan Kairen, take a look." Ning picked up the memorial on the ground, her heart trembling. She said, "Your Majesty, can I read it? I'll show you what you're afraid to see." A tyrant with unpredictable emotions is generally not trustworthy. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. First Battle, Bobei Pass. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 First Battle, Bobei Pass. Ning saw Qi Hingyuan looking at her with a narrow gaze that she couldn't bear, so she had to open the memorial to read. "Please fight." The 2 bright red characters are written directly in front. Ning's eyelids twitched and she looked down. Bobei requests war and reclaims lost territory. Please grant your Majesty's permission. Bobei Pass is one of the 9 gates in the gateway of Qi to Jiang State, with a treacherous terrain. It was occupied by Jiang State 3 years ago. Ning closed the memorial and respectfully placed it on the dragon table, whispering, "Your Majesty, let me see this memorial." "What do you intend for me to do?" she asked with great skill, and Qi Hingyuan couldn't help but take a few more glances at her and said, "I plan to use the Bobei Pass advice from your 18 advice to fight, but the battlefield is constantly changing. Your Bobei Pass advice analyzed the battle 3 years ago, and perhaps it is not suitable for the present, so I want you to go to Bobei Pass. Do you serve as a military strategist?" Ning asked. Qi Hingyuan curled his lips and said, "Your ambition is not small." Ning was frightened and immediately knelt down. Qi Hingyuan said calmly, "Bobei Guan Marquis Ji Qingyi, like your father, was sent 1,000 miles away. In this battle, I let him come back to participate. If we win this battle, I will pardon his crimes. Do you understand what I mean?" Ning said, "I understand. 3 years ago, the 9 passes were lost, and the state of Qi ceded territory for thousands of miles. Half of the Marquis of Guan, Wu, was exiled. Bobei requested a war, and Qi Hingyuan called back Ji Qingyi to express his stance to those exiled Marquis of Guan, returning to the battlefield. If he could win, he would clear his name. Meanwhile, this was also a bait thrown by Qi Hingyuan towards her. If she successfully assists in the battle, her father's clan members also have hope of being exempted from the crime and being reborn." Ning had an illusion that the emperor in front of her had a clear understanding of her inner calculations. One of her goals in entering the palace is to revive the glory of the family. Ning's heart trembled with a chill. The emperor spoke up and said, "Just understand." He looked up at Ning kneeling there, his tone unclear. "Yan Kairen, do you need to go to Bobei Pass? Or can you sit in the palace and establish the victory of the Bobei Pass battle?" Ning's heart was once again cold, with a feeling of being seen through by Qi Hingyuan. Ning said, "I don't have such great skills yet. Sitting in the palace, I can analyze the battlefield. I need to go to Bobei Pass to participate in the war." Qi Hingyuan said sharply, "With your weak and unruly body, if you go to the battlefield, you won't survive a cup of tea." Ning. Marquis Wu of Yan is awe-inspiring, and Ning's elder brother, Yan Xiaoho, is also awe-inspiring. However, Ning, as a descendant of the Yan family, his body and bones are extremely weak. Not to mention holding a gun, a knife, or an arrow, it would be great if she could pick up a wooden stick. It seems that Qi Hingyuan has thoroughly investigated her and knows that she is very weak and unruly. Ning choked and didn't know how to respond, so she remained silent. Qi Hingyuan frowned and said, "Let's go down. I will arrange this matter myself." Ning immediately left and retreated to the door. Thinking of something, she turned back and said, "Your Majesty, can I ask you for something to bestow upon me?" "You say." "I want to bring my maid into the palace." Qi Hingyuan suddenly lowered his face and said, "The battle at Bobei Pass is imminent. You are about to set off for Bobei Pass. At this moment, what should your maid do in the palace? Will she serve you all the way? What are you doing? You don't know." Ning saw that Qi Hingyuan was angry and immediately knelt down, saying in fear, "If we win this war, I grant your maid permission to enter the palace." "Your Majesty, thank you. Get out." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Accompanying the Lord, testing her side. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Accompanying the Lord, testing her side. Ning immediately withdrew, her back covered in sweat. Ning went back to take a shower and made herself a cup of tea, with a hint of hatred shining deep in her eyes. "Jiang Chengqi, how did I bring about the downfall of Qi back then? Now, how do I bring about the downfall of Jiang?" Entering the palace is just a springboard, and Ning's ultimate goal is to point directly at the state of Jiang. The next morning, Qi Hingyuan sent someone to pick up Ning. Chen Yurong glanced through the window and then withdrew his gaze. Saihuan said, "Master, Kairen cannot stay." Chen Yurong lowered his eyes and said, "She is currently useful to your Majesty and cannot move." Saihuan said, "Can she really help your Majesty recover the lost land?" Chen Yurong said, "Can we just wait and see what happens?" Saihuan said, "I want her to succeed, but I also want her to fail." Chen Yurong squinted and said, "She can only succeed, not fail. Otherwise, what is your Majesty's authority?" Kai Huan thought to himself that since His Majesty ascended the throne, he has done many earth-shattering things. The ministers have shown respect, fear, anger, and hatred towards His Majesty. This is His Majesty's first battle since ascending the throne, which can only be successful and cannot be defeated. If it fails, I don't know how the ministers will attack His Majesty. The concubines in the harem all understood the truth, and Qi Hingyuan himself was even more aware of it. Therefore, this time, he went out in humble clothes to ensure the victory of this war. Ning lifted the car curtain and went in, only to see Qi Hingyuan sitting there with his eyes closed and distinguished, and the whole person paused. She exclaimed in surprise, "Your Majesty." Qi Hingyuan didn't open his eyes or pay attention to her. Ning sat down cautiously on the side, unable to help but look at the man in front of her. Sitting quietly without a dragon robe, she looked invincible. "Young master, are you on your way?" The voice was Chen Dongyan. Shouting to His Majesty Qi, it seems that His Majesty Qi does not want to reveal his identity. Ning is as quiet as a stone. "Let's set off." The king spoke, but still didn't open his eyes. The carriage slowly started and headed towards Bobei Pass. It's a 1.5-month drive, and it's in the evening when we arrive at Bobiguan. At this point, there are only 10 days left until the start of war. Qi Hingyuan did not enter the city, nor did he notify the Marquis Guan and Marquis Wu inside. He stood in the darkness, with his hands down, looking at the sky above his head. He said, Kairen, where would be better for us to set up camp?" It turned out to be testing her. Ning remained silent and pointed in one direction. Qi Hingyuan looked over and said to Chen Dongyan, "Go take a look." Chen Dongyan unloaded a horse from the carriage, rode over, and soon returned. He spoke in Qi Hingyuan's ear. Qi Hingyuan looked at Yan Ning and said, "The place where Yan Kai was selected is very good. Your Majesty is willing to trust me, and I will do my best." Yan Ning took the opportunity to express his loyalty. Qi Hingyuan hooked his lips and remained silent. Chen Dongyan put on his horse again and brought Qi Hingyuan and Yan Ning over. That is indeed a good place with dense tree shade, which can effectively block the enemy's line of sight. The terrain is extremely high, allowing them to clearly see everything inside and outside the city. There is water around it, which can provide some protection. There are no paths here, nor is it a good place for deploying troops, but it is excellent for reconnaissance. Chen Dongyan unloaded 2 horses and placed the carriage on the ground as their temporary tent. Yanning thought, this carriage used to be a living one. Fortunately, the carriage is large enough, and Chen Dongyan mostly stays out, otherwise she really wouldn't be able to stay. However, sleeping here with Qi Hingyuan really made Yanning a bit uncomfortable, almost unable to sleep well every night. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Victory in the First Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Victory in the First Battle. After staying for 10 consecutive days, on the 11th day, both sides engaged in battle. Qi Hingyuan witnessed the war with his own eyes. Yan Ning stood beside him, and Chen Dongyan stood behind Qi Hingyuan with a sword, ready to escort him at any time. Suddenly, Yan Ning spoke up, "Jiang state is about to lose. In terms of military power, the states of Jiang and Qi are on par. 3 years ago, the state of Jiang achieved a great victory, with Qi ceding thousands of miles of territory, which made Jiang Chengqi extremely inflated. He killed her for the sake of Yufu, but Yufu could not help him win the battle except to please him in bed. He also felt that Jiang was incredibly strong and that he had not strengthened his military strength much in the past 3 years. On the other hand, due to the defeat of an emperor and a 1,000-mile city 3 years ago, the state of Qi was extremely humiliated. After Qi Hingyuan ascended the throne, he must have strengthened his military power. From this perspective, even without her, the state of Jiang would not have been able to defeat the state of Qi. Qi Hingyuan said indifferently, "Yan Kairen has good eyesight." Yan Ning said, "Because I was young and my body was weak, I couldn't practice martial arts. So I read more military books and didn't dare to move a door or wield an axe in front of your Majesty." Qi Hingyuan remained silent and stood there, watching the final outcome. Sure enough, the state of Jiang was defeated, and soldiers from the state of Qi rushed forward, taking back the lost city 3 years ago and planting the flag of the state of Qi. Qi Hingyuan looked at the flag fluttering in the air, his fingers slowly tightening. "Brother, have you seen it? This is just the beginning, how the territory lost by the state of Qi in the past is now being recovered by the imperial brother. The state of Qi achieved a great victory and immediately spread the good news from thousands of miles." Qi Hingyuan still hadn't entered the city. He took Chen Dongyan and Yan Ning and casually found an inn, ordered some food, and then set off to return. After a month and a half of turmoil, we finally arrived at the imperial capital of Jiang City, and Yan Ning was about to fall apart. Qi Hingyuan glanced at her and said, "Yan Siren's body and bones are really useless." Yan Ning weakly said, "Your Majesty is right. My body and bones are indeed not strong enough, so your Majesty promised earlier to let my maid enter the palace when the battle is won." Chen Dongyan. "I am here. Go and deliver the message." Chen Dongyan glanced at Yan Ning, who was weak, and lowered his gaze to deliver the message. 5 days later, Nian Dai entered the palace. As soon as Nian Dai saw Yan Ning, she pounced on her and cried. Yan Ning said, "I'm not dead yet." "Ah bah, little." "No, what nonsense are you talking about, talented person?" Nian Dai stared. Yan Ning said, "What are you crying about?" Nian Dai pouted and said, "I miss the talented person too much. The talented person was taken away that day, and I was eager to hear from him. I waited for more than 4 months before entering the palace. Do you think I'm not in a hurry? After speaking, he said again, not only the servants are anxious, but also the Marquis of Wu, his wife, and the members of his family are very anxious. Ning frowned and said, I'm not sure if I can write them a letter. This requires Qi Hongyuan's consent. After all, the Yan family is still a criminal minister. Qi Hongyuan should be very happy with her great victory in the first battle. She made a small request, and he will agree, right? Qi Hongyuan was indeed happy, and the victory of this battle also broke a hole in the dusty dark sky in the hearts of Qi ministers, entering some light. At the court meeting, the ministers unanimously demanded that Qi Hongyuan work hard and, taking advantage of the great victory in the first battle and the high morale of the soldiers, continue to declare war and reclaim all the cities lost 3 years ago. Qi Hongyuan sat high on the throne without speaking. After the ministers finished speaking, he spoke up and said, Do you all hope that I will go to war again? His gaze swept over the dark ministers and landed on several Marquis Wu. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The King's Intention, Just Trying Water. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The King's Intention, Just Trying Water. Yang Jing stood out and said, Your Majesty, according to the law of war, if you win, you will take advantage of your strength. But after hearing your Majesty's words, it seems that you don't want to go to war again. I dare to ask your Majesty, does your Majesty have any plans? Just trying the water, Qi Hongyuan said quietly. Yang Jing didn't understand these 4 words. When they were separated, he understood them. When they were combined, he also understood them. However, when the king spoke, he didn't understand them. He looked at the king on the throne with a hint of confusion. Not only did he not understand, but all the ministers in the court also did not understand. Fu Shan stood out and asked, Your Majesty is testing the current military capabilities of the state of Jiang. Not really. The king threw out 2 unexpected words. Fu Shan raised his eyebrows and said, Forgive me for being foolish. Qi Hongyuan wiped off his Shan dragon robe and said lucidly, 3 years ago, all 18 beacon towers in the state of Qi were defeated. My imperial brother died in battle, Chen Wuho died in battle, Qi Crown Prince died in battle, Xian Yingjun died in battle, Yan Xiaoho died in battle, Xia Guanho died in battle, Chang Wuho died in battle, Lu Guanho died in battle, Peng Xiaoho died in battle. Many people have died, from emperors to generals, completely defeated. Do you think that it is truly our state of Qi that is corrupt and incompetent? Of course not, Qi has always had a strong military force. Back then, the late emperor personally launched an expedition to destroy the state of Jiang and unify the country. With such a grand plan in war, the late emperor naturally discussed with all the marquises of Guan and Wu, and also determined the marching route. It can be said that there is absolutely no risk. But for some unknown reason, the state of Qi suffered a crushing defeat, and the soldiers of the state of Jiang seem to have long seen through their methods of warfare. No matter which route they marched, they would be cut off and surrounded, leaving no way out. They suspect that there are spies in the military who have leaked their combat plans. However, the people involved in the combat plans are all trustworthy Marquis Guan and Marquis Wu. Who would be willing to take advantage of them? So, it's not an inner ghost, why on earth is it? In the past 3 years, the shame of defeat has been nailed to everyone's hearts. They are not angry or sad, but they dare not declare war rashly. They believe in the military strength of Qi, but they are more afraid of the divine power of Jiang. Now that they had heard the king's words, Fu Shan and Yang Jing seemed to understand something. Fu Shan looked up in surprise and said, Your Majesty means that you are trying to test the depth of Jiang's side. Exactly. Yang Jing continued, the old emperor of Jianghua has passed away, and the new emperor has ascended to the throne. In that war, which he personally led and was able to cause such a devastating defeat to Qi, this person must be a skilled warrior like a god. Although the launch of this war in Bobigwan was somewhat sudden, with the ability of His Majesty Jiang, it is impossible for Jiang to be defeated, but Jiang has already been defeated. He frowned as if somewhat puzzled. Qi Hingyuan smiled coldly and spoke with a hint of coldness. Just a small water test at Bobei Pass, I found out that Jiang Chengqi is not a skilled warrior. 3 years ago, there must have been a master behind him, but now, this master is no longer there. Why is your majesty so certain? Yang Jing asked. Jiang Chengqi's original wife, the Empress, has died of illness, Qi Hingyuan replied. Yang Jing raised his eyebrows in confusion and said, What does this have to do with what they said? You may not know that this original Empress, surnamed Mu, was the princess personally pointed out to Jiang Chengqi by the old prince of the Jiang kingdom. After marrying Jiang Chengqi, she has never appeared in the imperial city. Fu Shan and Yang Jing exchanged a glance. It seems that there is something strange and eerie going on here. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Empress Jiang Guomu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Empress Jiang Guomu. Qi Hingyuan said again, she has been writing a river map all along. Initially, I thought she was just writing a river map for the state of Jiang, but now it seems that she has also written a river map for the state of Qi. Fu Shan was shocked and said, she is from Jiang and also the princess of Jiang Chengqi. Can she come to our country of Qi? Qi Hingyuan sarcastically said, I haven't even seen her before. Who knows what she looks like? She just stood in front of me, and I won't know who she is. Besides, others, if she wants to come to the state of Qi, there are ways. Yang Jing said, is it related to the great defeat of Qi 3 years ago? Absolutely related. Qi Hingyuan's eyes were gloomy and his tone was cold, but he suddenly curled his lips and mocked, saying, such a useful person, Jiang Chengqi let her die. According to the water test at the Bobei Pass, without this original empress, Jiang Chengqi would not be able to know the terrain as well as his hands. So, if he wants to win 100 battles against Qi, it will be impossible. Your Majesty will raise troops to attack Jiang even more at this time. The ministers began to petition again. Qi Hingyuan said, it's not urgent. If the Battle of Bobei Pass is defeated, Jiang state will inevitably respond. At this time, it's not easy to go to war. His eyes remained calm and he said, Jiang, I will personally take it down to pay homage to the emperor. What happened in the court, Ning didn't know. She turned around from Bobei Pass and tossed back and forth for more than 3 months, but her body fell apart and she has been recuperating for the past few days. After the great victory in the Battle of Bobigwan, His Majesty Qi remained silent again. She was not instructed to do anything. I haven't come to Fengzi Palace either. Even if you don't look for her, why don't you look for Consort Chen? It seems that I have been in the palace for several months and have never heard of any concubine being favored. Is it not necessary, or is it not in the mood? I guess I'm not in the mood. The territory has not yet been reclaimed, why do we feel happy? This kind of emperor is in line with her wishes. If Her Majesty Qi does not want to reclaim lost territory, then she will have a headache. Talent, just now there was a message from Fengzi Palace asking you to come over. Nian Dai suddenly came in and said to Yan Ning, who was thinking about something. Yan Ning raised her eyebrows and glanced at Shi Do. It's almost Su Shi. At this moment, what's the point of announcing her? Thinking to himself, without hesitation, he got up from his chair and walked towards the door. Upon arriving at the main hall and seeing Chen Yurong, he knelt down and saluted, saying, Yanning has seen Lady Guifei, and Lady Guifei is safe and sound. Chen Yurong sat there gracefully, with 2 palace maids dyeing her cardamom. She glanced at Yan Ning and said, Yan Kairen, you're here. Come and see how the nails in this palace are dyed. Yan Ning stood up and walked forward. The 2 palace maids immediately greeted her and then stepped back slightly, giving her a place to stand. Yan Ning looked at Chen Yurong's hands, slender and fair, well-nourished, with 5 nails that were neither long nor short. 3 of them were wrapped in cardamom leaves, while 2 had already been unpacked, revealing pink fingernail shells. The color is very beautiful, she concluded. Is that right? Chen Yurong asked with a smile. Well, the hands of Empress Dowager Guifei are slender and white, paired with such bright colors, adding more beauty. Yan Ning politely praised and praised. Chen Yurong said, do Yan Kairen want to dye it? Yan Ning said, thank you very much for your favor, Empress Dowager. However, Yan Ning is a rough person and doesn't deserve such a beautiful color. Staying it in Yan Ning's hands would ruin things and also stain Empress Dowager's eyes. Chen Yurong didn't force it either, as if he was just casually saying, then help me dye the other hand. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Chen Guifei's wand responsibility out of nothing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Chen Guifei's wand responsibility out of nothing. She handed over her other hand, and there were no colors on the 5 nails. Yan Ning said, it is Yan Ning's blessing to be able to serve the Empress Dowager. Yan Ning stood there, picked up the red cardamom flower, kneaded it into water, and then kneaded it into a circular shape about the size of Chen Yurong's thumb. She pasted it on, covered it with cardamom leaves, and tied it with a rope. She moved very lightly, but Chen Yurong let out a gentle moan, appearing a bit painful. Yan Ning raised her eyebrows slightly and said, did you hurt Empress Dowager? I'll be more gentle. Chen Yurong remained silent, only his face was not very attractive. Yan Ning continues to wrap the 2nd nail, then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th nails. After finishing a handbag, Yan Ning withdrew. Chen Yurong looked at 5 fingers and said, it's so ugly. Yan Ning. I feel like she's cursing her. Yan Ning remained silent. Chen Yurong casually said, Yan Kairen followed your majesty down to the Bobei pass and it was a great victory. Yan Kairen is really skilled. Yan Ning immediately knelt down and said with great fear, I need your majesty's favor in order to make a contribution. However, the great victory at Bobei pass has nothing to do with Yan Ning. Yan Ning did nothing but command his troops like a god. Your majesty's eyes are like a torch, one in the bright and one in the dark. With proper cooperation, we have the joy of a great victory. Seriously. It's true, Yan Ning dare not deceive the Empress Dowager. Chen Yurong said, since that's the case, what does your majesty want of you? Yan Ning paused slightly, realizing that the words were full of danger and hadn't figured out how to deal with them. Suddenly, she heard the palace maid's stern shout from beside her. Bold Yan Talent, how dare you rush into the noble concubine? With just one word spoken, I caught a glimpse of Chen Guifei sitting there unraveling all the cardamom leaves she had just wrapped for her. The cardamom leaves, along with the juicy cardamom flowers, fell onto her body. In an instant, the elegant and luxurious clothes were dyed with various colors. Yan Ning. Drag it out and make 10 big moves, Chen Guifei said. Yan Ning was almost laughing in anger. There is such a master, no wonder on the day he entered the Phoenix Purple Palace, that little palace maid was so reckless. The upper beam is not straight and the lower beam is crooked. Empress Dowager. Has this palace allowed you to speak? Chen Guifei said slowly. Yan Ning said sternly, Your Majesty is going to punish Yan Ning. Yan Ning has to ask, what crime did Yan Ning commit? Chen Yurong said, rushing into this palace, didn't you just stop talking? Yan Ning said, did I collide with you? Didn't you? Chen Guifei looked innocent as she pointed to her clothes. You have altered the clothes in this palace. Is it me who made the flowers? Yan Ning gritted her teeth a bit. She knew that the harem was not easy to mess with, and there were endless ways to win favor. There were also many ways to punish others, but she never expected that someone would have such a strong ability to open their eyes and tell lies. Creating something out of nothing. Say kill, then kill. Chen Yurong looked at Ning and said coldly, did you just make these cardamom flowers and leaves? I did it, but... It's okay if you did it. They have dirted our clothes now. It's not your fault, is it still our fault? It was originally your fault. As Ning was about to say this, Chen Yurong probably guessed what she was going to say and sneered, Yen Kairen, I advise you to speak more carefully and slander the noble consort. The punishment will be even worse. Okay, your position is high, you have reason. Ning took a deep breath and said, Empress Dowager. End of this chapter.